How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing pretty well. Weather's calmed down a bit. It's very nice, pleasant, pretty much pleasant here right now. But kind of a slow day. Nobody calling for remote assistance. So I stupidly pulled out my phone and started scrolling through Twitter. And I'm sure everyone's heard that the U.S. is talking about, or I guess they're planning or going to ship cluster munitions over to Ukraine because of the U.S. isn't keeping up with HIMARS production or something along those lines. And so I keep seeing like the same kind of tweet here where it's like, and it's always the same thing where it's like, I swear to gosh, they even say like the same line. Now everybody's in defense, in the defense media world is a freaking expert on cluster munitions. I don't know why. And it's always this hot take that these cluster munitions are like the greatest thing since sliced flipping bread. Um, I don't want to say that they're necessarily on par with chemical weapons, but they're pretty close. There's the Oslo Agreement where a lot of countries have signed off banning cluster munitions, and whole reason being is these aren't like the artillery shells and other weapon delivery systems where they deliver a bunch of landmines. They release thousands of these little bomblets, and these little bomblets are supposed to explode either really close to the ground or as soon as they hit anything, they're all supposed to explode. It's like a little mini carpet bombing. And the U.S. is probably the largest user of it. We used it in Vietnam. We used it in both Iraq conflicts. We used it in Afghanistan. And I'm not a fan of them at all, primarily because, I've seen estimates widely range from between 10 and 30% of the bomblets will not actually explode upon hitting the ground. And they're small. They're really, really small. So what ends up happening is they just go boink, and they go about a couple inches into the earth, if that. And so now what you've got is you've got a little tiny landmine waiting to go off, and they end up. One of the reasons why so many different groups want them banned is they end up killing crap loads of people. This is again completely different than those artillery shells and whatnot that are intentionally meant to fire landmines. Landmines, when they're delivered like that, are really easy to spot. They're meant to be easily spotted. That's a delivery system that's meant to like remove an area from somebody, an invading force or the other military force from trying to take. And even then, that's kind of a controversial thing because typically what you're supposed to do when you lay a minefield is you're supposed to map out all the mines. Because that way, in the future, people could go through, and it's much easier and safer to demine if you have a rough idea of where all the mines are. Of course, it never works out. That never works out. And I think a lot of people online don't understand how dangerous munitions are over time in the ground. France still spends a ridiculous amount of money each year trying to demine and remove unexploded ordnance and stuff from World War I, not even talking World War II. Germany, every job that I've ever done in Germany, we had to have basically on site, if we were digging anywhere into the ground, we had to have on site bomb disposal technicians because so much of Germany was bombed into the Stone Age during World War II. Even in the United States, a lot of people tend not to realize this, but for many of the battlefields from the Civil War, if it was a really long, in-depth, crazy kind of battlefield, that they try to keep people out of certain areas, and it's a sign of respect for the men that lost their lives, but two, we have a problem with Civil War era munitions blowing up that are buried in the ground. And these little things are so damn small and so damn tiny that they're an absolute nightmare to try to find. And they look like little trinkets, They don't necessarily look like an explosive, especially to a small child. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge, huge, huge problem. Now, I've seen people try to defend this by saying, well, Russia's using these things wholesale, and they're even using them on civilian cities, which, of course, is absolutely a war crime. Russia has consistently been just committing war crime after war crime. For example, their kidnapping of Ukrainian children and shipping them into inland Russia. That kind of screwed up shit. But if you're going to use that logic, by that very logic, because Russia has used phosphorus artillery shells, we should be shipping phosphorus artillery shells to Ukraine, kind of thing. My other big thing, and this is what I kind of take exception to this gentleman who was an artillery officer. I don't think he's ever had to walk through a field after one of these shells have gone off. That was probably one of the most hair-raising things that I ever would have to do. Would be we'd have to go in areas where our own artillery had basically hit the area with these bomblet munitions, and it could just not just be the artillery. The Air Force loved to use them too, and the whole time you're looking for like just little holes in the ground, and you're trying to stay away from the holes in the ground. Meanwhile, you have to keep 360-degree awareness all around you because you got to worry about somebody taking a pot shot at you and so on. Needless to say, I didn't like these munitions. I really didn't like these munitions at all because again, such a large percentage of them fail to go off when they hit the freaking ground. It's just like, like an artillery guy. An artillery guy loves every kind of munition that he has. Oh, I'm sure he loved calling in these missions, fire support missions in, because he's not the guy that has to walk through it. These are the same guys where, their idea of close artillery support is always by default danger close. And don't ever ask for danger close because they're just going to drop it right on your freaking head kind of thing. There'd be times where I'm wondering if like the fire support officer in the rear with the gear, if he's dyslexic or something, or maybe he's looking at a completely different map than me, where it's like, whoa, and you can't call in to correct them because by the time the shells are starting to hit, it's already too late. It's already too late. I guarantee you, this fucker killed more people with these munitions than the Iraqis did during the Gulf War. That was their biggest problem in the Gulf War. Our own people were getting killed by our own support, especially the Air Force. Love to strafe our boys. But it's just like this guy, I guarantee you this guy has never seen the results of these bomblets. Like he's never had to shoot an animal because 2 of its 4 legs are been blown off. And they've never seen like a kid who's had both hands blown off because they picked up a piece of metal. They thought it was a piece of metal they could sell for scrap, and it turned out to be an unexploded bomblet. And these things are meant to have like a hair trigger because they're meant to blow up like when they hit the ground. So if they don't hit when they hit the ground, they're still on a hair trigger kind of thing. I just don't know why people are championing for us to ship these things over there because one, I don't think they're very militarily effective. I don't. I can't think of a single conflict that we have had where we've used these munitions and they've proven to be effective on the battlefield, where they've won a battle or whatever, And 2, once this war is over, we're just adding to the nightmare for the Ukrainians to ever try to reuse this land in eastern Ukraine. Or I'm sorry, confused myself. Eastern Ukraine. Like they just never will be able to use it again. Because these things, they're a million times worse than a normal mine. They're a million times worse. And they're scattered. You could have a situation where you might have one every half a kilometer, or you might have a situation where you find one and there's literally 200 of these things unexploded, and it's all from the same delivery system. It's a crapshoot. I have not heard of anyone who has an effective means of eliminating these things. And we're still struggling with demining minefields from World War II and from the Korean War and the Vietnam War. It's just it's ludicrous to me, and it's like and good Lord, I haven't done it. I'm not stupid enough. I absolutely know if I post anything on Twitter about the fact that, hey, maybe this isn't the best idea. Maybe we should find an alternative to this weapon system. People will flip out at me. But again, if this stuff was so dang effective, Russia would be doing a lot better right now, because that's pretty much the munition that they're using in force. Is they're just firing these things all over the place, and it's not stopping the Ukrainians at all. The Ukrainians have been rather successful in taking their land inch by inch. It's just this conflict. It's kind of like politics, like every time there's a presidential election, if you're a Democrat, whatever the Republican did was the worst thing ever. And then the Democrat comes into office, does the same exact damn thing as the Republican guy did. Now all of a sudden, it's okay. It's okay. And the Republican voters do the same thing, where like whatever the Democrat did, oh, it's the worst thing ever. Republican does the same thing. Hey, it's the greatest thing ever. It's the same thing with this conflict with Ukraine. And I've seen people where they'll say this, like anybody that brings this up, one, they get accused of being like a fascist Russian apologist or whatever. And then they'll also fire up with the whole, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm a veteran, or I know experts, and they say, these things they're the bee's knees or whatever. Or it's like, again, if you ever have to walk through one of these fields, it's the worst thing on the fucking planet. And if you've ever seen what these things do to communities, and it's going to hit the rural communities, there's just going to be thousands upon thousands of acres that will not be usable for anything for not decades to come, for probably over a century. Because there's no way, you can't even just set off a massive bomb and try to get these things to blow up. That's not necessarily enough to do it. They're going to be just time bombs. Millions of little time bombs. And again, all the other ordnance that's been fired, it's the same issue. It's absolutely the same issue. And of course, Russia firing the same munitions, that's a problem. Nobody's arguing one way or another, but it's just like, this totally overly complicates things with the rest of the NATO allies, because like 90% of NATO has signed this agreement not to use these munitions. So it becomes an issue. And I do understand why Ukraine has the perspective that we will take anything we can to fight for our freedom, to fight for our national identity, to fight for our citizens. And I respect that. I absolutely do. And if I was my perspective would be completely different if I was a Ukrainian. But at the same time, these people that are championing for this, they've obviously never seen what these things do. And I'm not talking about when they land, I'm talking about 10 years afterwards. Sorry, I didn't bring a rant about a really dark subject, but it's like I just keep seeing these tweets and all. And it's like, this sounds like something that somebody playing a video game would say, It's like, Mike, I hate to tell you this, we don't live in a video game. When the conflict's over, things aren't magically fixed. The munitions during the Gulf War didn't magically disappear from the ground. The munitions that went into the earth in Afghanistan just didn't magically disappear. And it ended up being NGOs. It's not the U.S. military that has to handle this. It's not the U.S. government that has to clean this up. It ends up being NGOs. And it's a long, drawn-out process that takes decades and decades and decades. Every day there are people in Vietnam that get blown up. And they might have been working in the same field since the Vietnam War. Well, then all of a sudden they hit one and it takes off their leg. It's just like, it's just weird to me about this conflict. It feels like so many people on social media, this is like a fun little entertaining thing. Again, people are going to accuse me of being pro-Russia. I'm certainly not pro-Russian. Absolutely not am I pro-Russian. I want Ukraine to win this war. I think it's a just war for them. But at the same time, it's just, I don't see how this is going to be effective at all. And all it's doing is just complicating things. But that's my rant. That's my gibberish. And again, I realize I'm kind of doing the same thing that this guy is doing, where I'm trying to act like, well, I know better than everybody because I used to be a grunt. But at the same time, it's one thing to call the artillery firing. It's another thing to either A, be on the other end of it, or B, have to go through where it's been fired and then see if there's any survivors, kind of thing. And you can you can very easily get used to seeing pictures of dead people and so on. It's completely different when you can hear them struggling and screaming and crying and shit and crap, especially when it's animals and kids. When you see an adult get killed, that is a lot easier to process and dehumanize than when it's a kid. It's a lot harder. It's one of the reasons why so much of us veterans have to struggle with PTSD to this day. But I digress. I hope you're all doing well. I hope the weather in your neck of the woods is a bit better like it is in mine. Y'all take care. Ciao.